Part 29. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 281. Chapter 281 Croton Flower. Mr. Joe is pampered at home, so how could he be willing to do such a thing? Seeing the shyness on Lee Min-min's face, she felt that it would not be a bad idea to do it again. He stood up reluctantly. Then Miss Lee will wait for me to come back. As he spoke, he raised an eyebrow at Lee Min-min. Fortunately Mr. Joe turned around quickly, otherwise he would have seen Lee Min-min's nauseated expression. Miss Zijuan stepped forward and patted Lee Min-min on the back. Why do you think you came out to see Mr. Joe? Zikuku has been following Lee Min-min since she was a child, and she knows that her young lady definitely disdains Mr. Joe. She has been on a hunger strike for the past few days to seek death, so why did she suddenly change her temper? Is it possible that the young master really stimulated me? I have my own plans. Where are the things I asked you to prepare? Lee Min-min waved her hands and finally eased the feeling of vomiting. Zikuku took out a folded handkerchief from her arms and said, Miss, what's in it? Croton flower. Lee Min-min replied and poured the powder on the handkerchief into Mr. Joe's teacup. Soon, the croton powder was mixed with the tea, making it difficult for people to see the problem. Miss, what are you going to do? Zijuan's eyes widened. She didn't expect Lee Min-min to behave like this. Before Lee Min-min could answer, Mr. Joe came back carrying fragrant poria cakes. He put the poria cake on the table and leaned towards Lee Min-min. Min-min, look, I bought you the poria cake you want to eat. As he spoke, Mr. Joe got closer and closer, and even his title changed. Lee Min-min twitched the corner of her mouth, and she separated the distance between the two of them without leaving a trace, and picked up the teacup on the table. Mr. Joe, thank you for your hard work. Drink some water first. This was the tea handed over by the beautiful lady. Mr. Joe's eyes lit up, and the pock marks on his face shone. He took the teacup and deliberately touched Lee Min-min's hand. Min-min's hands are so tender and smooth. Lee Min-min withdrew her hand and wiped it hard underneath. Watching Mr. Joe finish the tea in one gulp, Lee Min-min's eyes flashed with joy. Very good. The power of croton flower comes on quickly. Soon after Mr. Joe finished drinking, his stomach growled. He turned pale, covered his stomach, and couldn't help but clench his buttocks. Mr. Joe, what's wrong with you? Lee Min-min asked, pretending to be confused. Mr. Joe opened his mouth and smiled awkwardly. Min-min, I'm going to go to the hut first. You wait for me. After saying that, Mr. Joe couldn't hold it in any longer. He covered his stomach with one hand and his with the other, and ran out in embarrassment. Looking at Mr. Joe's leaving figure, Lee Min-min let out a sigh and laughed. After a while, Mr. Joe came back. He just didn't sit down for a moment and ran away again, holding his stomach. 3 times in a row, Lee Min-min had enough fun and stood up. Zikuku, let's go. Miss, are you waiting for Mr. Joe? Zikuku thought of the croton powder poured into the teacup, and knew that Mr. Joe might have to sit in bed for a long time today. No more waiting. Lee Min-min clapped her hands and walked out of the private room with a smile. The poria coco's cake bought by young Master Joe was also left in the room. After leaving the restaurant, the smile on Lee Min-min's face faded a bit. She looked at the people coming and going around her, feeling a sense of powerlessness in her heart. I was laughing happily just now when I was teasing people, but why did my face droop as soon as I came out? A voice with a smile came from one side. Lee Min-min was startled. She looked up and saw a pair of clear eyes. The young man jumped down from the tree with a graceful figure. You, who are you? Lee Min-min was so frightened that she took a step back, but a blush rose on her cheeks. Have you seen it all? She was a little flustered. Noticing her nervousness, the young man smiled and said, Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. Zijuan supported Lee Min-min. looking worried. What are your conditions? Lee Minmin stabilized her body and then looked at the other party. The clothes the young man was wearing looked like old clothes with several patches on them, so he probably didn't belong to a noble family. Lee Minmin subconsciously felt that the other party wanted to take advantage of her in order to gain some benefits. Hearing this unexpectedly, the young man was stunned for a moment, then shook his head and said, "I don't want any benefits." "Then what do you want?" Lee Minmin tightened her hands and questioned. The young man came back to his senses and realized what Lee Minmin meant. "I just saw it by accident. I won't tell anyone if I tell you. I heard it, it's time to go." A girl not far away called out, and she responded, "I know, come right away." He smiled at Li Minmin and ran away quickly. Looking at Wen Qing's leaving figure, Li Minmin stood for a long time before leaving. At this time, Mr. Zhou, who was still in the hut, was really about to escape. "Master, are you okay?" the boy asked anxiously. "The young master has been in there for a while, but there is still no sound." After a while, Mr. Zhou's weak voice came from inside, My feet are numb." As soon as the boy helped Mr. Zhou out with his trembling legs, he heard another muffled sound. "No, get in quickly." Mr. Zhou's face turned pale and he shouted in panic. There was really nothing in his stomach. Mr. Zhou squatted for a long time, but he was still tremblingly helped out by the boy. The boy called a carriage and finally took young Master Zhou back to Zhou's home. Mrs. Zhou felt heartbroken when she saw her son's embarrassed appearance. "What's going on? Weren't you fine when you went out? Did that Li Minmin do something?" "Mom, it's none of Minmin's business." Mr. Zhou still pretended that Li Minmin was smiling at him, so he naturally helped him speak. Mrs. Zhou rolled her eyes and said, "I deliberately let you know who I am. I made it clear that I wanted to pester our Zhou family. How can it be better?" Seeing that her son looked wrong, Mrs. Zhou did not continue. "Although the Li family is famous, everyone now knows that the young master of the Li family has become a fool. I'm afraid that the Li family will be lonely in the future." Coupled with the fact that this marriage was unexpected by Mrs. Zhou, she would naturally be dissatisfied. She wouldn't have agreed if her son didn't like it. The doctor came to see him, but he didn't diagnose Mr. Zhou's condition. He just prescribed medicine for Mr. Zhou to take to relieve the symptoms. Back at the Li mansion, Zijuan thought of something, walked up to Li Minmin, and said softly, "Miss, will you be found out if you give Mr. Zhou a chin bean powder?" "Probably not." Li Minmin returned hesitantly. "It was given to her by Taoist Master Wu Bai, so that she could use it without worry. It shouldn't be detected, right?" However, he was still worried, so Li Minmin asked Zijuan to inquire about the situation. Sure enough, the Zhou family did not find out that Mr. Zhou had eaten croton flour. Li Minmin breathed a sigh of relief and trusted Taoist Wu Bai a little more. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 282. Chapter 282 Bullying goes too far. Longjiao Temple. Wang Chen sat on his knees on the futon, his eyes closed tightly, his mouth opening and closing, reading scriptures. On the futon beside him, Sulayun knelt down with the same piety and recited together. The bell in the nunnery rang, and Wang Chen slowly opened his eyes and looked at Sulayun. Seeing that she was still thinking, he stood up. When Sulayun finished reciting the scriptures, he opened his eyes and saw that Wang Chen was no longer in the house. She got up and walked out, and saw Wang Chen carrying a pole with 2 wooden barrels hanging on it, walking towards the vegetable garden. Sulayun stepped forward. When we got to the vegetable garden, we helped Wang Chen start watering and fertilizing. After a busy period, the two of them didn't say a word, but they didn't show any embarrassment. After taking care of the vegetable garden, Wang Chen went to the back mountain. Sulayun knew that she was going to the underground cave, so naturally he would not follow her. She stayed to tidy up the yard before leaving. Going to another wing, Lian Xian and Kualai were waiting for Sulayun. Since being granted the title of Lord of the Township, Sulayun has been coming to Longjio Nunnery every day. He does not let Lian Xian and Kualai follow him, and only lets them stay in the wing. Miss. When Lian Xian and Kui Lu saw Sulayun coming, they quickly got up from their seats. Let's go back. Sulayun arrived lightly. On the way back to Sun Mansion, Sulayun sat in the carriage and read medical books. She only studied for half a year in her previous life, and she only scratched the surface of many of them. Therefore, during this period, she often read about medical skills whenever she had time to make up for it. The carriage suddenly stopped, and Lian Xian pressed against Sulayun, preventing her from falling forward. What happened? Kualai opened the car curtain and asked. The coachman quickly apologized, Miss, someone suddenly rushed out just now. The young one pulled the reins in order to avoid it. Sulayun looked out and saw a man with a pockmarked face lying in the middle of the road. She was a little surprised. Ask, is the other party okay? The little one didn't hit me either. The coachman muttered, but got out of the carriage to check. Before the coachman could get closer, the pockmarked man suddenly jumped up. Ouch, it tickles me to death. He started scratching himself frantically, and slowly his whole face turned red. Mr. Zhou, how are you? Li Minmin ran out and stood not far away, somewhat helpless, asking worriedly. But there was a smile in his eyes. Sulayun raised an eyebrow, what is Li Minmin doing? No, it's okay. Mr. Zhou couldn't help but take a few steps back as he spoke, staying away from Li Minmin. He and Li Minmin have not encountered anything good these days. Could it be Li Minmin Kefu? But they are not married yet. Mr. Zhou couldn't understand, but he didn't dare to get too close to Li Minmin. Ms. Li, we should stay away from each other. Mr. Zhou, what is it about me that you don't like? Li Minmin took a step forward and saw Mr. Zhou scratching his itch while retreating, the expression on his face almost uncontrollable. Ms. Li, let's get here first today. After saying that, Mr. Zhou scratched his head and ran away quickly. The boy followed behind, Master, wait for me. Li Minmin suppressed her laughter, the corners of her mouth twitched, and then turned around to leave. Sulayun met Li Minmin's eyes and smiled. Snored. Suddenly seeing Sulayun, Li Minmin didn't react. She was stunned for a while before letting out a soft hum from her throat. She now has an indescribable feeling about Sulayun, so much so that she doesn't know how to face it. On the contrary, Sulayun spoke kindly, Miss Li, who was that just now? You don't need to know. Li Minmin turned her face away, Zakaku, let's go. Yes, miss. Zakaku saluted Sulayun and quickly followed Li Minmin. With no more people blocking the way, the coachman got back into the car and waved his whip. The carriage drove slowly. Miss, that person just now seems to be Miss Li Minmin's fiancé. Kualai hesitated to speak. Sulayun just asked Li Minmin. She thought Sulayun was curious about this matter. Hearing Kualai's words, Sulayun didn't have any expression on his face, really. That young master of the Zhou family has a pockmarked face and is somewhat famous in the capital. The word fame is used in the family, which is obviously not a good reputation. Sulayun smiled lightly and shook his head, and did not ask any further questions. At the gate, Sulayun got off the carriage. As soon as I looked up, I saw a carriage coming from the other side. She waited for a while, and it was her second aunt who came down. Second aunt Sulayun stepped forward and observed Qin Xian's face. Has something happened again with Aunt Kyang Shuang? Qin Xian said coldly, go in and talk. When the two of them arrived at the main hall, they saw Sun Gro also there. Mother. Came back. Sun Gro said softly. Qin Zian sighed heavily. Qian Shuang, I really don't know what kind of ecstasy soup Wen Rugui gave her. What's wrong with Qian Shuang? Sun Gro asked with worry on his face when he heard this. If Chiu Tong hadn't mentioned it, Qian Shuang would have kept it secret from me. Qin Zian frowned tightly. Then when Rugui's mother said breast milk is good for her children, so she asked Qian Shuang to breastfeed Zuzu. Qian Shuang didn't for milk, she asked people to prepare a large table of lactation-stimulating things, and she insisted that Qian Shuang eat it. Sun Gro and Suleun looked at each other and knew that things were not that simple. Sure enough, Qin Zian continued, maybe she was injured during childbirth. Qian Shuang couldn't produce milk after eating those things. The Wen family got the secret recipe from somewhere and asked Qian Shuang to drink it again. This time the milk was yes. Qian Shuang is even weaker. When I went to see her before, I thought she was still not well, but today I found out that was the case. This Wen family is really bullying people. Sun Gro frowned and cursed. Don't say breast milk is good. No matter how good the breast milk is, if the mother cannot produce milk, there is no reason why she must be forced to breastfeed. Is it possible that those wet nurses are just decorations? And Qian Shuang, can you still bear it? Suleun couldn't help but ask, even if she could understand Aunt Qian Shuang, wouldn't she have any hesitation at this point? Qin Zian closed her eyes and suppressed her anger. If she couldn't hold it back, I wouldn't be so angry. I have asked someone to send a letter to my father, and I will take Qian Shuang and Zuzu away tomorrow. We can't let Qian Shuang if this continues. I will go there with my second aunt tomorrow. Suleun thought for a while. Although she couldn't help her by taking her aunt away, she could help her look after herself. That secret recipe sounds a bit unreliable just by listening to it. She was even a little worried that the secret recipe might harm her aunt in some other way. Qin Zian nodded, okay. One more person to go and one more person to persuade Qian Shuang on her behalf. Thinking of this, Qin Zian's sister's current appearance appeared in front of his eyes. When I left the capital that year, my sister still had flesh on her cheeks, and her whole person was full of youthful vigor. But now he has been polished into that by Wen Jiexu. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 283. Chapter 283 Coming to pick someone up. Wenfu, main hall. My mother-in-law, what brought you here? Mrs. Wen smirked and looked across the people in front of her. Finally stopped at Mrs. Qin. Mrs. Qin is Qin Zian's biological mother. She is now nearly 50 years old. She seldom goes out and spends most of her time in the Qin family's Buddhist hall, praying for her daughter and son-in-law. Qin Zian and Suleun were sitting under Mrs. Qin. Their purpose of coming today was very simple, which was to take Qin Qian Shuang back to the Qin family. Even if Qin Qian Shuang refused, Qin Zian still had to kidnap him back. Mrs. Qin knew her daughter's temperament. She insisted on marrying Sun Malayang and going to the northwest with Sun Malayang. She could not persuade her to do anything. Now when she saw Qin Zian's appearance, she knew that today's matter must be done. Do it? She was sitting in her seat. Although there were wrinkles on her face, she gained a bit of magnanimity. Because I was in the Buddhist hall all day long, my body still smelled of sandalwood. She turned the beads on her wrist and said, Mrs. Wen, you came here so rashly. I'm sorry for disturbing you. I hope you'll forgive me. My mother-in-law, what are you saying? Why are you so polite? Mrs. Wen is smiling but not smiling. This time in the spring, although when Rugui was admitted to the imperial examination, she did not even get into the top 10 in the palace examination. Naturally, she did not leave any impression in front of Emperor Jianwen, and she did not get any official position. For her son's future, she had to flatter Mrs. Jean so that Mr. Jean could help arrange things for Wen Rugui. Hence, they have taken very good care of Qin Qiangshuang in the past few days. Then I'm not welcome. Mrs. Jean smiled slightly, but one sentence left Mrs. Wen speechless. Sulayun pursed her lips to hold back a smile. This move of the second aunt's mother was really powerful. We are here to take Qiangshuang and Zuzu back to Qin's house to stay for a few days. My mother-in-law, what does this mean? Qiangshuang is staying well in our house, why should we take her back? If this spreads out, won't it make outsiders suspicious of Gui Gui's relationship with Qiangshuang? Mrs. Wen was confused. Qin Zian was fine when she came to see Qin Qiangshuang yesterday. Why did she have to take him back today? She had no idea why. Emotions. How come I heard that when Qiangshuang had a difficult delivery, your son didn't know which gentle village he was in? Mrs. Jean is not a soft persimmon, otherwise she would not be here today. Even though Qin Qiangshuang was not her daughter, Qin Zian had a good relationship with Qin Qiangshuang and she would take more care of her. Therefore, she couldn't help but get angry when she heard those things. A good girl was married, but she was almost tortured to death by the Wen family. Mrs. Wen smiled awkwardly, my mother-in-law, it's all those people's nonsense. Don't believe it? After Qiangshuang became pregnant, we kept her well-fed and well-fed. Are you Gui even wanted to take care of Qiangshuang? I haven't read enough. No, I didn't get any good rankings this time in the Spring Festival. Then you mean that your son's failure in the exam is Qiangshuang's problem? Mrs. Jean glanced at Mrs. Wen with sarcasm in her words. The curve of the corner of Mrs. Wen's mouth weakened a bit. She could tell that Mrs. Jean was determined to take Qiangshuang away when she came today, but she still said, that's not what I meant, mother-in-law, don't think too much about it. As for what you said, to take Qiangshuang back, why don't we discuss this matter with Qiangshuang and Rugui? Also good. Mrs. Jean should arrive. Qin Zian's expression changed slightly and her mouth moved, as if she wanted to say something, but she quickly stopped. She believed her mother had a reason for doing what she did. Mrs. Wen looked at the maid beside her and said, go and call the young master and the young mistress. Yes. The maid obediently agreed and quickly walked out of the main hall. Sulayun's eyes flashed, and he suddenly stood up and said, I happen to have something I want to talk to my aunt alone, so why don't I go there too? As soon as Mrs. Wen opened her mouth, she heard Mrs. Jean say, that's fine, Mrs. Wen won't mind, right? No, of course not. Mrs. Wen twisted the handkerchief hard and then took a breath. The maid led the way and led Sulayun to Qinglian courtyard. The room was closed tightly, but Qiu Tong stood outside. Miss Su. As soon as he saw Sulayun, Qiu Tong was stunned and hurriedly stepped forward. Why are you outside? Sulayun asked. Qiu Tong hesitated for a moment and replied, the young lady said that she wanted to rest and would not let the servants go in to serve her. Where is Zuzu? I just finished feeding Chun Shui and the others are taking care of her in the house. Sulayun nodded, walked up and knocked on the door, and Qiangshuang, it's me, Leun. After a while, Qin Qiangshuang's weak voice came from inside, come in. Sulayun opened the door, and the smell of medicine in the room was very strong. She walked to the bed, her face slightly frozen. Under the strong medicinal aroma, there is also a taste hidden. Sulayun looked at Qin Qiangshuang's face carefully, and found that it was indeed worse than before. Aunt, Mrs. Jean and my second aunt are here. Why is the aunt here? Qin Qiangshuang was startled and pushed herself up, as if she wanted to get up. But he didn't have enough strength in his hands, so his arms went limp and he lay down again. Sulayun supported Qin Qiangshuang and put his hand on her wrist. His face becomes more and more difficult to look at. The moment Qin Qianshuang stood up, the smell became stronger. Sulayun wiped it from Qin Qianshuang's quilt, and she took out a blood-stained handkerchief. The sound of shattering came from behind. Qiu Tong turned pale and said, "Young madam." On the ground was the tea she had just brought, and it was still steaming. "How so?" Qiu Tong ran forward tremblingly, forgetting her dignity for a moment, and took the veil from Sulayun's hand. The blood on it has not yet dried, so it was obviously freshly stained. "Young madam, why didn't you tell me that you vomited blood?" Qiu Tong's eyes were red. She, a personal maid, didn't know anything. How much her young lady had suffered. "Lian Xian, go to the main hall and invite everyone here," Sulayun ordered with a cold face. Before Lian Xian could respond, Qin Qianshuang grabbed Sulayun and said, "Layun, don't go. And, this matter is not something I can decide." Sulayun looked into Qin Qianshuang's eyes and said word by word, "Lian Xian, hurry up and go." Lian Xian knew that the matter was probably serious, so she responded and ran out quickly. Qin Qianshuang didn't even have the strength to stand up, let alone stop Kuliu. "I just vomited some blood, it's nothing to worry about." As he spoke, blood overflowed from the corners of Qin Qianshuang's mouth. As her mouth opened and closed, blood could be seen coming out of her throat. "Madam, please don't do this to yourself." Qiu Tong couldn't help but shed tears, feeling guilty and scared at the same time. No wonder the young lady has not allowed her to serve in the house these days, she actually wants to hide her intention from them. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 284. Chapter 284. There is a problem with the secret recipe. Kuliu, go and fetch divine Dr. Wan quickly. Yes. Qiu Tong, open all the windows around you and put out all the charcoal fires. Sulayun sniffed the smell in the air and gave stern instructions. Hearing Sulayun's words, Qiu Tong quickly wiped her tears and rushed to open the window to put out the fire. Now is not the time to cry. Go and boil another basin of hot water. My slave will go immediately. Sulayun turned Qin Qianshuang over so that she could spit out the blood in her mouth and avoid blood piling up in her throat, which would make her choke easily. Qin Qianshuang couldn't stop coughing. There were blue veins on her hands that were tightly holding the edge of the bed, and there was no blood at all. "And, how do you feel now?" Just after feeling her pulse, Sulayun realized that Qin Qianshuang's health was worse than when she gave birth before, and it could even be said that she was at the end of her life. Such severe vomiting of blood now obviously seems to be something wrong. Sulayun was worried that something would happen to Qin Qianshuang if he continued to vomit like this. She reached out to touch the brocade bag at her waist, and her face darkened when she noticed that there were only 2 pills left in it. She actually forgot to put some pills in her kit these days. 2 pills were taken out, one was an antidote pill and the other was used to change the voice. It is of no use at all. The only method available now is acupuncture. "Miss Su, the water is here." As Qiu Tong brought the water, Qin Zian and others had already rushed over. Qianshuang. As soon as Qin Zian stepped into the house, she noticed the pool of blood on the ground, and her lips suddenly lost color. Mrs. Qin frowned when she saw this scene. Previously, she thought her daughter might be too worried and exaggerating. But now when she saw Qin Qianshuang's appearance, she realized that Qin Zian was not exaggerating. With Qin Qianshuang's condition now, it is possible that she will die in the next moment. Oh my God, what happened to Qianshuang? When Mrs. Wen saw the situation in the room, she immediately exclaimed, but the expression on her face was not sincere. She ordered in a hurry, "What are you still doing? Go and call the doctor for the young lady." "Shut up." Sulayun scolded her coldly and glanced at Mrs. Wen gloomily, "Go out and wait." "Qiu Tong, please bring the dregs of the secret recipe that Mrs. Wen asked your young lady to take. Yes. Mrs. Wen's expression changed slightly when she heard the word secret recipe. Coupled with Soleil's scolding at her just now, Mrs. Wen's voice was full of anger. Miss Su, what time has it been? Why are you taking the dregs? If something happens to Kyung Shuang, is it possible that you can still be responsible? I am responsible. Soleil stood up suddenly and walked quickly to Mrs. Wen. Now, please go out first. Meeting Soleil's eyes that were as if they were tempered with ice, Mrs. Wen trembled all over, feeling an indescribable chill in her heart, and her whole body froze involuntarily. By the time Mrs. Wen came to her senses, she was already standing in the yard outside. Mrs. Jean and Qin Zian were standing not far from her, looking at the closed door with some worry. The window that was open before has been closed. Soleil washed his hands, but when it came time to apply the acupuncture, he was a little afraid to do it. In the past, she used to perform acupuncture according to the methods taught by her master. This was the first time she tried to perform acupuncture on her own. She didn't dare to think about the consequences if she got a wrong shot. The blood on Qin Kyung Shuang's mouth was wiped away by Chiu Tong, but blood would flow out again soon. She seemed to notice Soleil's hesitation and forced herself to smile. Leun, you, do it. Soleil's heart twitched and he no longer hesitated. She placed the stitches little by little, each stitch taking longer than usual. 1 stitch, 2 stitches, 3 stitches. Sweat gradually broke out on Soleil's forehead. Qin Zian's condition still didn't seem to have improved at all, and she was still vomiting blood. Even his breathing began to become weak. The whole person also closed her eyes. If Chiu Tong hadn't often checked her breathing, she would have thought that Qin Kyung Shuang was dead. As the last needle fell, no more blood flowed from the corners of Qin Kyung Shuang's mouth. Ms. Su, was it successful? Chiu Tong checked Qin Kyung Shuang's breathing again, but it was still very weak. Soleil shook his head and wiped the sweat from his eyelashes. Now my aunt is just hanging. If there is no treatment later, she will still. Soleil did not say the rest of the words, but Chiu Tong understood in his heart. She once again wiped the blood from the corner of Qin Kyung Shuang's mouth. Miss, she's had a hard time. There were footsteps outside, and Dr. Wang pushed open the door and entered. Seeing the situation in the room, he was stunned for a moment, then quickly stepped forward to check Qin Kyung Shuang's pulse. It's just that his answer was the same as Soleil. Mr. Wang, please come and take a look at this secret recipe. My aunt has been taking this secret recipe to produce milk for a while. Milk production. Hearing Soleil's words, Dr. Wang's face showed confusion. As he stepped forward to check, he said, this Grandma Wen's body is not suitable for feeding a child. Why does she still need to take milk-producing medicine? As soon as he finished speaking, Divine Dr. Wang pinched out a handful of something from the dregs of the medicine. How dare you let Grandma Wen drink this kind of thing? Do you want her to produce milk, or do you want her to die? At this time, Dr. Wang also understood why Qin Kyung Shuang's condition was like this. The corners of his mouth tightened, showing indescribable annoyance. He came to the Wen family 3 times, and every time, the Wen family always frightened him. Even if he is a doctor and a kind-hearted doctor, even if he is an ordinary citizen, he cannot stand it. Wang, Mr. Wang, don't talk nonsense. How can this medicine harm Kyung Shuang? Mrs. Wen hesitated and spoke. Divine Dr. Wang threw the things in his hands on the table. This is called gold. I have been a doctor for many years, but I didn't know that this thing can promote lactation. That doesn't mean there's a problem. Mrs. Wen muttered. Dr. Wang snorted coldly. With such a large dose, even if there is no problem, it will cause problems. This money is not worth the money to activate blood circulation and remove blood stasis, but I told you when I left last time that Grandma Wen's illness can only be rested, This kind of medicine it must not be eaten. It would be better for you to just put so much in. Mrs. Wen was shocked and realized that there was something wrong with the secret recipe. She also knows that Qin Qiangshuang cannot die now, so she will not deliberately do anything in these places. The prescription. When Mrs. Wen thought of something, her face changed greatly. The prescription was given to her by Wen Rugui, but she didn't ask Wen Rugui where she got the prescription at that time. She just let the doctor take a look and said it was useful. She also just give it to Qin Qiangshuang. Mother. Wen Rugui's voice came from outside the yard, and soon, he ran in with disheveled clothes and shortness of breath. There was only one person following behind him, it was Cao Rui. Mom, how is Qiangshuang doing? What happened to my sister? Cao Rui also asked anxiously. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 285. Chapter 285 Send back to the Qin family. The two people looked more anxious than the other, and they both looked worried about Qin Qiangshuang. If you think about it carefully, you can see the problem. Wen Rugui was so anxious, but the lipstick on his collar was clearly visible. Looking at Dao Yui again, Suleun couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. If he remembered correctly, Dao Yui was still pregnant, but looking at her movements, it was hard to tell. As if noticing Suleun's eyes, Dao Yui shrank down and touched her belly. Qiangshuang, she. Mrs. Wen sighed unbearably. Seeing her reaction, Cao Rui felt happy. Is it possible that Qin Qiangshuang is dead? Cao Rui stepped forward, her eyes instantly turning red. Sister, your life is so miserable, how could something like this happen? Qiangshuang is dead. Wen Rugui didn't know what he thought of, and he froze in place. Some people are like this. They don't cherish something when they get it, but they don't realize how important that person is until they lose it. My aunt is alive and well, are you cursing her? Suleun's light words made both of them change their expressions. The expression on Cao Rui's face froze. It's good that my sister is fine. I gonna go see. When Rugui blinked, her movements still a little stiff, and walked inside. Worried about what he would do, Suleun gave Lian Xian a look, and the latter quickly followed. Mrs. Jean's eyes flickered from Dao Yui to Mrs. Wen. Mrs. Wen, should you give us an explanation about this secret recipe? This, my mother-in-law, this matter is really our fault. The doctor said that there is no problem with this medicine, so we thought of letting Qiangshuang drink it so that Zuzu could have milk to eat. We also have good intentions. Mrs. Wen smiled apologetically, saying that this matter could not be spread, as it would have a great impact on the Wen family. Hearing Mrs. Wen's words, Dao Yui's eyes flashed. When she saw the dregs of medicine on the table, she couldn't help but tighten her hands, and sweat appeared on her palms. Good intentions, your kindness almost cost a life. Mrs. Jean's tone was cold. If I let you take care of me anymore, I'm afraid Qiangshuang's body will be waiting for us next time. I think for the sake of Qiangshuang's life, I have to take her back to Qin's house. My mother-in-law, please say goodbye. Qiangshuang is not in good health right now, and she is moving around, isn't she? As soon as Mrs. Wen finished speaking, Suleun said, Dr. Wang, could you please help me later and accompany us to send Aunt Qiangshuang back to the Qin family? Physician Wang looked at the expressions of the Qin family members and made some considerations in his mind. He didn't want to see anything happen to Qin Qiangshuang again, so he said, I have nothing else to do for the time being. It's no problem to Grandma Wen back to Qin's house. With divine Dr. Wang here, there is no need to worry about Qin Qiangshuang's safety. Seeing this, Suleun led people into the house. In the room, Wen Rugui looked at Qin Qiangshuang, who looked pale, and didn't know what she was thinking. Master Wen, if you have nothing to do, Please go out first. How is Qian Shuang doing? Sulayun glanced at Wen Rugui suspiciously. Wen Rugui didn't feel distressed at all when she had a difficult delivery before. She obviously didn't care about Qin Qian Shuang's life or death. Why did she seem to be a different person now, and even asked about Qin Qian Shuang's situation? It's too late for Mr. Wen to pretend to be a lovebird now, Sulayun said sarcastically, reaching out and pulling out the silver needles on Qin Qian Shuang's body, leaving only one on the top of his head. It's better to say that Mr. Wen is a fool to study. Okay, suddenly your conscience is discovered. You. After being ridiculed by Sulayun, Wen Rugui returned to her previous appearance, grinning in anger, but did not dare to say anything to refute. Ever since the palace examination, his father has been reminding him to treat Qin Qian Shuang well. This might allow Qin Qian Shuang to say a nice word for him in front of his father-in-law, and then his official position would be secured. Therefore, during this period of time, Wen Rugui also stopped a lot and often came to Qin Qian Shuang's yard. Qin Qian Shuang treated him as before, with gentleness and consideration, which reminded Wen Rugui of the days when they first met. The reason why I asked to marry Qin Qian Shuang was naturally because I liked her, but later on I only heard the smiles of new people and not the tears of old people. Is it possible that Mr. Wen still wants to stay and listen a few more words? Sulayun's cold gaze flashed across Wen Rugui's face, and the undisguised disgust made Wen Rugui feel as if she had been humiliated. But he didn't dare to say anything. He heard that Emperor Jianwen made Sulayun the township king. If he really wanted to talk about it, Sulayun's identity was still on his paper. Wen Rugui glanced at Sulayun angrily, then turned and left. Qiu Tong and Lian Xin changed Qin Qian Shuang into clean clothes, carefully lifted her up and took her out. When Qin Zian saw Qin Qian Shuang being helped out, she immediately stepped forward and said, "Be careful." Ignoring others, Qin Zian followed Qiu Tong and Lian Xin out of Qinglian courtyard. Mrs. Jin looked away and said, "Mrs. Wen, I'm sorry to disturb you today." "Don't disturb, don't disturb." What else could Mrs. Wen say? She could only watch Qin Qian Shuang being taken away. "I will ask people from Dali Temple to investigate the secret recipe. It would not be a good thing if such a secret recipe were spread outside." As soon as he stepped out of the courtyard gate, Sulayun stopped, turned around and spoke to the Wen family members in the courtyard. Tao Rui's pupils shrank slightly and she lowered her head in panic, not daring to look at Sulayun. Sulayun's lips curved, and he had an idea in his mind. "I'm afraid this matter has something to do with Tao Rui." On the way back to Qin's house, the carriage was walking on the road, shaking occasionally. Under this slight shaking, Qin Qian Shuang slowly woke up. Meeting Qin Zian's worried gaze, she was stunned for a moment. "Sister, where am I?" She looked to both sides and realized that she was no longer in King Lianyuan. "Send you back to Qin's house." Qin Qian Shuang frowned slightly and subconsciously said, "If I go back like this now, my father and mother will be worried." She didn't know that Mrs. Jin had also come to the Wen family today. When Mrs. Jin came to Qinglian courtyard, she had already fallen into a coma. "You're really worrying us if you don't go back," Qin Zian persuaded her earnestly. "Do you know, you're just a little bit close to dying." Qin Qian Shuang didn't know why she had gone around the gate of hell. She blinked, thinking of something, and said anxiously, "What about Zuzu? Where is she?" "Don't worry, my mother is in the carriage at the front, and she will take Zuzu with her." Qin Zian opened a corner of the curtain and pointed at the carriage in front of her. Qin Qian Shuang was relieved. She was worried about Zuzu staying in the Wen family. She knew very well how much Mrs. Wen disliked her and Zuzu, but she felt in her heart that Wen Rugui would not be so cruel. "That's good." Qin Qian Shuang's voice was full of weakness. She only said a few words, and her whole body drooped again, feeling very weak. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 286. Chapter 286 Consultation. Sulayun found a good place for Qin Kaingshuang so that she could have a good rest. Seeing Qin Kaingshuang's weak appearance, Qin Zian and Sulayun didn't make much noise along the way, for fear of disturbing her rest. Until the carriage stopped in front of Qin's house. Qiu Tong and Lian Xian supported Qin Kaingshuang. They probably rested for a while and regained some strength. Qin Kaingshuang looked better. But Sulayun knew in his heart that this was just an illusion. Seeing Qiu Tong and Lian Xian helping Qin Kaingshuang into the house, Sulayun turned to look at Divine Dr. Wang, stepped forward and said respectfully, "Dr. Wang, can you do anything about my aunt's illness? If the situation is urgent, I don't have anything I can do, but just now Miss Su gave Grandma Wen an injection, so I still have a way to treat it, but it takes some time to prepare some medicinal materials. Then there's the miraculous Dr. Lao Wang." Sulayun was overjoyed. She had several ways to protect Qin Kaingshuang's heart, but she was not confident of a complete cure. It was also because she was too confident, thinking that the Wen family would never do anything to Qin Kaingshuang again, but she forgot that there was still Dao Yui. Her eyes showed remorse. Qin Zian noticed Sulayun's expression at that moment and frowned slightly. "Layun, you have done a lot. If I really talk about Kaingshuang's affairs, I shouldn't trouble you. Second aunt, when you say this, does it mean you don't regard Layun as a member of your family?" Sulayun lowered his emotions and joked. Seeing her say this, Qin Zian relaxed a little. "If I didn't treat you as a family member, Xiaoxian would probably be the first to jump up and object. The yard where Qin Kaingshuang lived before has not been tidied up, so she was temporarily placed in Qin Zian's yard. Divine Dr. Wang checked Qin Kaingshuang's pulse and wrote a prescription. He took care of Qin Kaingshuang for the time being until the medicinal materials were collected before treatment could begin. This time before Divine Dr. Wang left, he still couldn't help but wonder, and walked to Sulayun. "Miss Su, can you take a step to speak?" Sulayun nodded, walked out of the courtyard with Divine Dr. Wang, and stopped under the courtyard wall. "Is there something wrong with Dr. Wang? Last time at the Sun family, I was surprised that Mr. Sun Wen could be protected by you from such a serious injury, just like what happened to Grandma Wen this time." Physician Wang was so confused that he even used honorifics towards Sulayun. He felt that Sulayun was far better than him in medical skills. "Dr. Wang, don't say that. What happened to Sun Wen last time was because I gave him medicine, which had an effect. As for my aunt's situation this time, I also made a mistake. You should be able to tell. In a lot of ways I'm just getting started." Sulayun was not modest in what she said. The medical skills she learned from her master were not based on ordinary teachings. She could not come into contact with many patients at Longjio Temple. She described many pulse conditions based on what was recorded in medical books. If she encountered a pulse condition that was different from what was recorded in medical books, she would probably have no choice. Divine Dr. Wang frowned. After thinking about it carefully, it was indeed true. But the acupuncture technique alone surprised him. Generally speaking, learning about medicine starts with seeing, hearing and asking about everything. Very few people skip this step. Dr. Wang thought of a possibility. Could it be that Miss Su's medical skills are self-taught? Those who have a master to teach them medical skills should not skip seeing, hearing and asking. When Sulayun heard this, he pursed his lower lip and said, "I'm not self-taught. I have a master." Even though the master has not agreed to let her become a disciple in this life, in her heart, the master is the master, and she will not hesitate at all. Then what? Divine Dr. Wang stopped talking. He shouldn't ask this kind of question, but it was a pity. Miss Su should have some talent, why didn't her master train her well? I don't know who Miss Su's master is, can I get to know him? Master has lived in seclusion for many years and rarely comes out. Suleun returned. Dr. Wang knew what this meant, and sighed helplessly. After thinking about it, he said to Suleun, Miss Su, you are very talented in medical skills. If you are willing, you can come to Baiko Hall for a consultation. This can be considered a good idea exercised. Can I? Suleun did not expect Dr. Wang to say such a thing, but was stunned. Going to Baiko Hall for consultation is indeed attractive to her. These days, she is busy reading and has no chance to practice her skills. It would be a good opportunity to go to Baiko Hall to give it a try. If Miss Su is willing, of course it's okay. Physician Wang had a kind face and welcomed Suleun very much. Since there was an opportunity, Suleun certainly would not refuse, so he agreed. For this reason, Suleun locked himself in the room in the next few days, read the medical books carefully, and made complete preparations. 3 days later, by Kaitang, Suleun took Lian Xian and Kuliu into the hospital. Girl, our doctor hasn't come yet, so we may have to trouble you to wait. The medicine boy was packing medicinal materials in front of the cabinet. He caught a glimpse of 3 figures and hurriedly stepped forward to greet them. Dr. Wang asked me to come. Dr. Wang? Are you talking about our shopkeeper? The medicine boy thought of something, looked at Suleun, saw the medicine box on Lian Xian's shoulder, and realized, you are the Su who our shopkeeper said will come to sit in court today, miss. It seems that divine Dr. Wang had greeted the medicine boy before. The medicine boy led Suleun inside. The shopkeeper told us before that the place assigned to you has been taken care of. On the left side of the Baiko Hall are the medicine cabinets and the counter for collecting money, while on the right side there are screens to separate several places, making it easier for doctors sitting in the hall to treat incoming patients. Bringing Suleun to the position, the medicine boy couldn't help but take one more look before leaving. Can such a young girl really have medical skills? Even though it was ordered by divine Dr. Wang, the medicine boy still became suspicious. There was a lot of light in the sky, and the other 2 doctors who were sitting in the hall also came. One of them is Dr. He. The 2 of them couldn't help but be stunned when they saw Suleun sitting there. This is the girl who the shopkeeper said is very talented? You are young, are you reliable? Dr. He's position was right next to Suleun. When he sat down, he noticed Lian Xian and Kuliu and couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. A girl's house is probably just here to have fun. Just don't cause trouble to the medical clinic. Suleun noticed Dr. He's expression, but didn't take it to heart. As a girl studying medicine, she will naturally be questioned. If she has to explain it to everyone, how can she explain it to everyone? Soon, the first patient arrived. He walked straight to the other doctor, who was obviously an acquaintance. As time passed, more and more patients came. Some patients were probably here for the first time, so they would look at the 3 doctors. When they saw Suleun, they were stunned for a moment, and then they chose Dr. He and another doctor. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 287. Chapter 287 Necessary Relationship. After all, anyone who walks in and sees Suleun will not think that he is a doctor. Suleun didn't feel embarrassed, he just waited patiently, and his hands were not idle. She is preparing new medicine, and my grandfather's health has gradually improved during this period of time. If my grandfather had been younger, there might be a chance for a cure, but now there is no way. All that can be done is to minimize the impact of rheumatism. Lian Xian had studied medicine, so she helped Suleun. Kuilu looked at it for a while, but she felt dizzy after looking at it, so she had to stand on the side, like a door god. It just means that his expression is not as serious as the door god. Doctor! An old voice shouted uncertainly. Sulayun looked up and saw an old woman with grey hair. She was holding a crutch that had not been polished much, and her clothes were still patched. Sulayun looked at the two doctors beside him. There were people standing in front of them. It must have been like this, so the old lady stood in front of her. "Old lady, please sit down." Sulayun stood up and helped the old woman sit down. "Thank you, girl." Although she is old, her voice sounds very energetic. Looking at the old woman's face, there seems to be no problem. Sulayun was a little confused, but she also knew that such a reading might miss something. She motioned to the old woman to put her hand on the small cushion, and then put it on her. While feeling his pulse, Sulayun asked, "Old lady, do you feel uncomfortable somewhere?" "I'm getting older, and I have a lot of discomforts. It's just that I've been feeling particularly uncomfortable these past few days. I can't sleep well at night, I always wake up, and every time I wake up, I find myself covered in cold sweats. The pulse is weak and beats slowly, which is a common pulse condition in the elderly." Sulayun didn't move his hand in a hurry when he heard what the old woman said. Maybe she missed something. After waiting for a while, the old woman's pulse became strange. Fast and urgent. Looking at the old woman's face again, her lips began to turn white and cold sweat broke out on her forehead. The old woman was clearly aware of her situation and her breathing became rapid. "Old lady, don't be nervous, look at me and breathe slowly." Sulayun let go of his hand and had some considerations in his mind. She stood up again, checked the old woman's pupils, picked up the teacup on the side and handed it to the old woman. "Old lady, have a drink of water." After a few sips of water, the old woman's breathing gradually calmed down, and her pulse became less rapid. Sulayun wrote a prescription. "Old lady, you have worked too much on weekdays, resulting in insufficient qi and blood, which has affected the beating of the heart. Please take the prescription and prescribe the medicine. After you return, take a good rest for a few days and drink the medicine once a day. Come to Baiko Hall to see me again in 3 days." So many medicines. Although the old woman was not very literate, she saw that the paper was full of words and knew that a lot of things had been written on it. She looked a little hesitant. "Old lady, don't worry, they are all inexpensive medicinal materials." Sulayun came softly. Hearing this, the old woman glanced at Sulayun, then stood up and walked over with the prescription. Sure enough, even though there are so many medicinal materials, many of them are common and the prices are very affordable. The old woman felt relieved and bought 3 pills of medicine, which only cost 30 cash. She took out the string of money from her sleeve, counted them out one by one, and handed them to the medicine boy. Watching the old woman staggering away, Sulayun slowly withdrew his gaze. Probably because of the old lady's suggestion, more and more people came to Sulayun for consultation. When some people sit down, they will ask anxiously, "Are you really a doctor?" Sulayun was very patient and explained his situation in a gentle voice. Those patients who believed her or thought it was okay to let her try would let her have a look. Those who didn't believe her asked and then got up and went to the other 2 sides to wait. Soon, it was noon. Quilayu and Lian Xian came in carrying 2 large food boxes, which were the dishes Sulayun ordered at Jade Tower yesterday. In Baikatang, including their 3 masters and servants, there are now a total of 8 people. 1 medicine boy is responsible for getting the medicine, a clerk is responsible for settling the accounts, and another medicine boy helps the 2 doctors. Divine Dr. Wang agreed to let Sulayun sit in the Baiko Hall for consultation. Naturally, she would not give up this opportunity easily, so it was necessary to establish a good relationship with the other people at the Baiko Hall. A yard was opened behind Baikatang, which was used to dry herbs, and a small kitchen was installed for the guys to cook. In the backyard, Quilayu and Liangzin neatly arranged the dishes, and the aroma attracted everyone's attention. The two medicine boys and the waiter looked at each other and murmured together. There are only 3 girls, how can they eat so much? 3 young brothers, these dishes were ordered by Our Lady, can you eat some too? Lian Xian stepped forward with a smile and said. Hearing this, the 3 of them were stunned for a moment. Does this mean inviting them to dinner? Can we eat? The waiter hesitated to speak, but his eyes had already fallen on the dishes. Lian Xian smiled and said, it's just a meal. After all, my lady will come to Baiko Hall in the days to come, and I will have to trouble you all. No trouble, no trouble. The 3 of them waved their hands repeatedly. Seeing that Lian Xian was sincerely inviting them, they resisted for a few times, then moved the small bench and sat down at the table. The dishes at Jade House are naturally delicious, and the 3 of us enjoyed them. In the front room, Suleun also walked forward with a smile. Doctors, if you don't mind, I have prepared some food. You can go and eat. No need, I have food at home. Doctor, he picked up his medicine box and left Baikatang without even looking at Suleun. Dr. Li saw his behavior and glanced at Suleun apologetically. Miss Su, don't worry, Lao he has always been this way. When your maid came in with the food box just now, I smelled the fragrance, and now it's still there. I'm really hungry. Miss Su, would you mind giving me a pair of chopsticks? Of course not. Seeing that Dr. Li also went to the backyard to have a meal, Suleun turned around and packed up the things on the small table. Lian Xian opened the curtain and came out. Miss, please come and clean up. You go and have your meal first. It's okay, it will be sorted out soon. Suleun said that it was indeed cleaned up. Following Lian Xian to the backyard. Since she was a girl who had not yet left the court, it was not easy for her to eat at the same table with a strange man. Therefore, Lian Xian and Quiliu specially brought a small table from the Sun Mansion to make it convenient for Suleun to eat. The 3 guys ate very quickly. As soon as Suleun sat down, the 3 of them had already finished eating. Not only did I finish eating, but I also carefully cleared away the dishes, chopsticks, and tabletop. Dr. Li sat at a table by himself and tidied up after eating. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 288. Chapter 288 Wound Suturing. For a period of time after lunch, there are basically no patients coming. Perhaps this meal had an effect. By the time Dr. He arrived after his lunch break, the atmosphere in Baiko Hall had changed. Dr. Li was answering some questions in medical books for Suleun. The 3 clerks were not as silent as in the morning. From time to time, they asked Lian Xian and Kuilu if there was anything they needed help with. When Dr. He saw the scene in front of him, his face suddenly became ugly. He snorted coldly and sat down in his own place. Old Li, I recently got a new medical book, do you want to read it? Hearing that there was a medical book to read, Dr. Li blinked. He knew what Dr. He meant, but after eating Suleun's meal, he endured his anxiety and finished answering Suleun. Just then I went to Dr. He. Old He, what kind of medical book is it? Let me take a look. Dr. Li asked eagerly. Dr. He took out an ancient book from the medicine cabinet. The wear on it was very serious, and it looked like it was indeed a medical book of some age. When he glanced at the words on it, Dr. Li's face lit up. How did you get this book? A friend who came back brought it for me. Dr. Li's expression made Dr. He breathe a sigh of relief. He raised his eyes and looked at Suleun, only to see that the other person was looking down at the medical book, paying no attention to the situation on his side. Can I have a look? I've pretty much seen it, you can take it? Dr. He looked away, muttering to himself that the little girl Pianzi had only learned medical skills for a few months and didn't know how valuable these medical books were. As soon as Dr. Li took the medical book, he heard the sound of rapid footsteps. Soon, several strong men carried the stretcher and went straight to Baikatang. "Doctor, help this person quickly." Dr. He and Dr. Lee looked at each other and quickly stood up and stepped forward. "I saw a man lying on a stretcher, with a hole in his stomach, and he could see what was inside. Put the person down quickly." Dr. Lee hurriedly waved, and 3 guys also ran forward to help, carefully placing the injured person away. Suleun had already smelled the strong smell of blood. He stood up and stepped forward, feeling nausea in his throat. The man's intestines almost fell out. This was the first time Suleun saw such a scene. Lian Xian and Kui Lu only glanced at each other, then ran to the corner to vomit. Even Dr. He and Dr. Lee, who have been practicing medicine for many years, were a little frightened when they saw it. How to treat such a deep wound? "Doctor, please save my brother quickly." "Xinping, run fast and ask Mr. Zhang and the shopkeeper to come." Dr. Lee ordered the waiter in an orderly manner. Dr. He squatted down and took the injured person's pulse. "How did you get injured?" "It was injured by a branch. This morning my brother went up the mountain and was chased by a wild boar. As a result, he hit a branch and ended up like this." The injured man's brother was very organized. Although he looked nervous, he still explained the whole story clearly. Fortunately, although the wound was deep, it was not big. Perhaps because of this, the injured person could still breathe. Otherwise, he would have been dead by the time he was sent to Baikatang. With such a wound, ordinary methods of stopping bleeding are useless. The wound can only be sutured as quickly as possible, and the less blood is counted. But for this kind of suturing method, Dr. Lee and Dr. He both relied on Dr. Wang and Mr. Zhang to do it themselves. They have never tried it themselves. Before Mr. Zhang and Dr. Wang arrived, we could only hold on to the injured's breath. Xinping came back quickly, but his face didn't look very good. He ran to Dr. Lee and whispered a few words into his ear. Dr. Lee's expression also changed. He glanced at Dr. He and Suleun, stepped forward, and whispered, "The shopkeeper is not at home. Mr. Zhang went to the mountain to collect medicine this morning and has not come back yet. In other words, we can only rely on them now." Dr. He took a deep breath and said, "Go and prepare the tools. You can't let people lie here and bleed all the time." The 3 people from Xinping hurriedly cleaned up the house and carefully carried the injured person inside. "You and your maid come and help us." Dr. He glanced at Suleun and said in a deep voice. Suleun responded and washed his hands with Lian Xian and went in. Unexpectedly, the injured man's brother saw the 2 girls entering and immediately shouted, "Doctor, how do you ask the girls to help? Can they do it? Is it possible that you are better than them?" Dr. He was already nervous about what he had to do later, but when he heard the man's words, he couldn't help but glare. Although he doesn't like Suleun, at this time, he is definitely more useful than others. The injured man's brother was frightened, and when he came to his senses, everyone had already entered. Inside the room, Dr. He and Dr. Lee looked at each other and started to take action. Suleun and Lian Xian were not careless either. They passed the knife and gauze in an orderly manner. Pieces of gauze were thrown into the basin, and the smell of blood in the room became stronger and stronger. Dr. He and Dr. Lee didn't even dare to blink. They quickly cleaned up some tiny wooden thorns stuck on the wound, and then carefully inspected the intestines that had fallen out. Fortunately, the intestines were not injured. They put the intestines into the injured person's stomach, and then came the most important step, suturing. This is a very delicate job, and a slight deviation will lead to serious consequences. Even though Dr. He and Dr. Lee were careful, something unexpected happened. Dr. He was accidentally pricked by a needle. Seeing that the needle and thread were about to fall into the injured person's stomach, a hand stretched out from below to catch the needle and thread. Dr. He raised his eyes and saw that it was Suleun. She had been paying attention to the movements of Dr. He and Mr. Zhang, and reacted immediately when she saw such a situation. Doctor He simply cleaned the wound and continued to suture the injured. Unknowingly, half an hour passed. Tie the thread and tighten the needle. Dr. He and Dr. Lee exhaled in unison. It was finally over. The rest of the matter was left to Sulayun and Lien Xin. The two of them looked at each other with joy in their eyes. The two of them then left the house and told the injured man's relatives about the situation. Although the wound has been sutured, there may be fever and inflammation in the future. For this reason, you need to stay in Baikatang for a few days until the condition stabilizes before you can take him back to rest. After learning that his brother was fine, the elder brother couldn't help wiping his tears, thanked the brothers who sent him here, and then went to the backyard room. Sulayun and Lien Xin had just finished cleaning up when they bumped into each other. Seeing the two of them, the injured brother thought of his suspicion just now and bowed sharply to the two of them. "I'm sorry, I misunderstood the two girls just now." Sulayun and Lien Xin entered the room before and only vaguely heard Dr. He's words, but didn't pay much attention to them. Now they saw the other party's reaction and finally understood. "Don't take it to heart," Sulayun said warmly. Hearing her voice, the injured brother felt even more embarrassed. "Then I'll go in and see my brother first." End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 289. Chapter 289 Happy Event. Sulayun returned to the medical clinic and saw Dr. He talking respectfully to an old man. She seems to have seen this old man? Lao Zhang recognized Sulayun at a glance. "Are you the girl that shopkeeper Wang mentioned? I didn't expect it to be her." "Mr. Zhang." Sulayun thought about the time when she came to Baikatang to look for Yecheng. It turned out that she had met Mr. Zhang at that time. Mr. Zhang couldn't help but sigh. "I was wrong at first." He looked Sulayun up and down, only to find Sueli a little creepy. "Lao Zhang. Your master is my old friend." Sulayun's eyes widened and he seemed a little unresponsive. "There is no one else but her who knows that Fen Yeching can be used as medicine and can teach you such a set of acupuncture techniques." Lao Zhang sighed and pulled Sulayun to sit down. "There is no rush to go in and see the injured person." Dr. He reminded him, and Mr. Zhang stood up reluctantly. "You two have studied with me and Dr. Wang for so many years. If you still can't do it well, wouldn't it be in vain?" Although he said so, Mr. Zhang still went to the backyard. After a while, Mr. Zhang came back with a calm face. Dr. He and Dr. Li looked at Mr. Zhang nervously, as if they were students waiting for their results. Lao Zhang looked at the two of them for a long time, nodded and said, "You did a great job, the wounds were treated very cleanly, and the wiring was very smooth." Hearing this, Dr. He and Dr. Li breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. "My heart is relieved. However, such a deep wound must be cleaned well. I'm worried that if the injured person later gets a fever, the consequences will be disastrous." After praising the two of them, Mr. Zhang's tone became more serious. "In fact, most doctors can perform such sutures, and what is more important is the subsequent treatment of the injured. Slight deviation will still cause the injured to lose their lives. The disciple understands." Dr. He returned. Dr. Li also nodded, indicating that he understood. This time, Mr. Zhang sat down again and looked at Sulayun. "Miss Su, when did you meet Dr. Fang?" Ever since he learned that his master and Mr. Zhang were old friends, Sulayun didn't know how to answer. But she also understood that since even her old friends did not know the whereabouts of the master, it seemed that the master did not want others to know where she was. Sulayun hesitated for a moment and replied, "Mr. Zhang, I grew up in Jingzhou, so naturally I met my master in Jingzhou." Jingzhou. Mr. Zhang was thoughtful, but did not ask any more questions. Perhaps because he is the apprentice of an old friend, Mr. Zhang is very concerned about Suleun, and will ask some questions to test her when he is free. Seeing that Suleun answered fluently, it was obvious that he had learned well, and Mr. Zhang would also show a satisfied smile. The afternoon passed in the blink of an eye. Liang Xin and Kuliu packed up the medicine box. Suleun stood up, said goodbye to everyone in the medical clinic, and left. Smoke also rose from the surrounding houses. By the time we returned to Sun Mansion, the moon had already risen. Today is the Sun family's family banquet. The dishes were placed on the table and everyone took their seats. Sun Xiao coughed lightly and said, "Changping, don't you have something to say?" Hearing his father's words, Sun Changping looked away from Jiang Susu's face. Before he could speak, his face slowly turned red. Jiang Susu on the side also lowered her head in shame. "I have a happy event to tell you today. Susu and I are getting married on the 15th of next month. Although everyone knows about this happy event, there is still a process to go through to make it final." "Wow, great." The most cooperative person is none other than Sun Yuxuan. As soon as Sun Changping finished speaking, he heard applause and exclamations. Qin Zian rubbed her son's head in a funny way. "You are happier than your uncle." "Mom, I haven't even seen what a wedding is like. Is it exactly the same as what Uncle Wu and the others said?" The Uncle Wu mentioned by Sun Yuxuan is a general under Sun Malayong. Last year, the other party rushed back to the capital to hold a wedding. After returning, Sun Yuxuan pestered him and told many things about the wedding. Qin Zian nodded, "Yes, it's just like what Uncle Wu said." "Very good." Sun Yuxuan is even more excited. Having said all the happy things, there is one more thing. That's what happened when Justin's son went to school. In the past few days, the Qin family has finally settled the matter, and Sun Yuxuan can go to the Royal Academy. Hearing the word "go to school," Sun Yuxuan's originally excited expression suddenly dropped. "Mom, Xiaoxian doesn't want to go to school." Think of any child of this age who always dislikes going to school. Especially for a child like Sun Yuxuan who has grown up outdoors since he was a child. Although Qin Zian would teach him when he was in the northwest, most of the time he would play with the soldiers and was really not interested in learning. But regarding the matter of going to school, Yuxuan's son naturally has no right to speak. Seeing his displeasure, Suleun said, "Didn't Xiaoxian always say that no one would play with you? When you get to the academy, there will be many companions to play with you." "Really?" Sun Yuxuan is hesitant. Can he still play in the academy? Suleun blinked and lowered his voice and asked, "When did my sister lie to you?" "No." Sun Yuxuan thought for a long time and slowly shook his little head. He looked a little sad and said hesitantly, "Then Xiaoxian, let's go to the academy and have a look." Seeing that Sun Yuxuan no longer resisted, Qin Zian breathed a sigh of relief. Even though the son must be tied up, it will be easier if the son takes the initiative. She gave Suleun a thumbs up. Suleun did not go to Baikatang every day, but every 2 days. Sometimes he would meet Mr. Zhang, and sometimes he would meet Dr. Wang. On this day, Suleun did not sit in the clinic, but stood in front of the medicine cabinet and worked as a dispensing clerk for a day. Xinping stood on the side. Although he didn't have to work today, he was even more nervous. After all, he had to keep an eye on Suleun's movements and was worried that she would grab the wrong medicine. Fortunately, after half a day, there were no mistakes. "Miss Su." Qin Xiu looked at Suleun standing in front of the medicine cabinet in surprise. Her belly had begun to become a little obvious. "My face is rosy, I think I have had a good time during this period. Why are you at Baikatang?" "Qin Xiu is here to get anti-fetal medicine, which is taken every half-month. Today, she met Suleun by chance. There was a girl in plain clothes following behind her, who seemed to be her maid. In fact, Chin Xiuda could have asked the maid to come get the medicine, but she had been staying in the house during this period and was really bored, so she took the opportunity to get the medicine and went out for a walk. Xinping took out the medicine bag he had prepared and handed it to the maid behind Qin Xiu. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter returns, the real daughter is reborn. Author, past and present. Chapter 290. Chapter 290. Xiaoxian is unhappy. Qin Xiu saw Suleun and left in no hurry. She was even more delighted to learn that Suleun would be at Baicaotang for a while. Miss Su, can I come to you often? If you are not busy, just come and exercise. Suleun noticed that Qin Xiu was still using honorifics towards him, hesitated for a moment, and continued, you can just call me Leun, now you but Madam number 1 scholar, there is no need to use honorifics to me. I'm used to it, Su Xiao, Le Yun, just call me Xiu Xiu, my mother used to call me that. Good. Suleun responded with a smile. I don't know why, but after Qin Xiu arrived, more and more people came to get medicine, so that Suleun had no time to chat with Qin Xiu. By the time Suleun came to his senses after finishing his work, Qin Xiu had already left. Miss, would you like to take a rest? Lian Xian brought a cup of tea to Suleun and asked her to moisten her throat. Although it is just taking medicine, you still have to stand and walk around. Some medicines are even located in a relatively high position and you need to climb up and down. Strictly speaking, it is still a physical activity. Suleun didn't feel tired at first, but after finishing most of the tea, he felt a little tired. Fine. She shook her head and asked again, what time is it now? It's just past the 4th quarter of Shenqi. So fast, Suleun was stunned. She was going to pick up Sun Yuxuan from the Royal Academy today. Xinping, I'm going to trouble you next. Xinping waved his hand and said, it's no trouble. Miss Su, just go ahead and get busy. Suleun had said before coming that he would leave early, but he didn't expect time to fly by so quickly. After a brief tidying up, Suleun took Kuliu and Liangxin to the Royal Academy. This is the first time in her life that she has come to the Royal Academy. The Royal Academy was funded by the royal family and was used for the study of the children of princes and some dignitaries. Suleun had a flash of suspicion in his eyes. Even if Su Changqing had the ability to place Su Changzhong in the Royal Academy, he would not dare to risk this trap. Why can't Su Changzhong study in the Royal Academy? Suleun didn't think of this problem until now. Suleun couldn't figure it out for a moment, so he secretly wrote down the matter and planned to check it out later. The servants of the academy led Suleun to a pavilion not far from the academy. Miss Su, please wait here. Another maid came forward and poured tea for Suleun. After waiting for a while, children ran out of the school one after another and were picked up by their own servants. Sun Yuxuan was the last one to come out. Xiaoxian. Suleun saw the small figure coming out and quickly stood up and stepped forward. Seeing Suleun, Sun Yuxuan didn't have the slightest smile on his face. What's wrong, aren't you happy to see your sister? Suleun frowned slightly, sensing something strange. Sun Yuxuan pouted and walked to Suleun, completely different from his appearance after school a few days ago. After attending school for a few days, Sun Yuxuan has adapted. Although he doesn't have much time to play in the academy, he still feels good because he is with his peers. This is the first time that a situation like today has occurred. Sister Leun, let's go back. Sun Yuxuan moved, as if he wanted to say something, but stopped when he reached his mouth. Suleun knew that pressing him would be useless, so he didn't ask any more questions and took Sun Yuxuan's hand and went home together. On the way, Sun Yuxuan lowered his head and looked up at Suleun from time to time, as if he was wondering why she didn't continue to ask him. Seeing Sun Yuxuan's little action, Suleun breathed a sigh of relief. To have such a reaction, I guess it was nothing special. Seeing that Sun Yuxuan's little moves became more and more frequent, Sulayun stopped. Sister Layun. Sun Yuxuan also stopped and moved very quickly. Hearing what Yuxuan's son said, Sulayun paused for a while. Let's go. Ah. Sun Yuxuan was stunned and couldn't react for a while. When he came to his senses, he quickly caught up with Sulayun. Sister Layun, what's wrong with you? He thought Sulayun would stop because he encountered something, but when he saw that Sulayun didn't say anything, he became anxious. Sister, why don't you answer Xiaoxuan's question? Hearing this, Sulayun finally reacted. Then why is Xiaoxian unwilling to tell sister? Why are you unhappy today? Sun Yuxuan seemed to realize something, pursed his lips tightly, and tangled his hands together. He looked at Sulayun. Sister, Qing didn't come today. Sulayun thought for a moment. She really didn't see Qing just now and didn't know what happened. You're unhappy because she didn't come? She squatted down and asked. It seems that these two children hit it off right away in school. Every time they come home from school, they can hear Sun Yuxuan mentioning Qing. No. Sun Yuxuan shook his little head like a rattle and finally stopped. Chai Ming said Qing didn't come because he didn't want to see me. How could be? Sulayun couldn't help but laugh. It turned out to be like this. It was probably a joke between children. But Yuxuan's son's expression was very serious. That's what Chai Ming said. He also said that Qing will marry him in the future, so let me stay away from Qing. Young children like to say such words the most. Sulayun couldn't help but laugh, and reached out to touch Sun Yuxuan's head. Then do you really want to stay away from Qing? Of course not. Qing and I are good friends, and good friends cannot be abandoned easily. Sun Yuxuan patted his chest and spoke righteously. Even though Liang Xin and Kuliu endured it, they still laughed when they saw this. Xiaoxian is right, but since good friends can't be abandoned easily, why are you still unhappy because of other people's words? Sulayun blinked and asked. This question really stumped Sun Yuxuan. He racked his brains to think about why he was angry, but suddenly found that he no longer knew the reason. If Qing doesn't come, there must be something delayed. Even if Qing doesn't want to play with you, it's still a matter between you and should be resolved by yourselves, right? Sulayun guided. Sun Yuxuan's eyes flashed and he looked at Sulayun suddenly. I know Sister Layun, I should ask Qing. Playing with Qing is my and King's business, and it has nothing to do with anyone else. That's right. Sulayun took Sun Yuxuan's hand and walked towards the Sun Mansion. No matter how much others say, it's still what others say. If the other party adds fuel to the fire, wouldn't it change the relationship between you and Qing? Worse. Sun Yuxuan nodded, yes. Sulayun raised the corners of his mouth with a smile. But I was thinking of myself. If she had been braver in her previous life and asked more questions and looked around more, she would not have ended up like this. End of this chapter.